higher you can lift your opponent in this move, the faster he'll hit the ground. It's not just your force working against him. His acceleration due to gravity can mean his head hits the ground with a 3,500-pound impact. On a hard surface like concrete, this is more than enough to cause a serious brain injury.
First, the opponent's arm works as a lever to optimize your control. Second, your own back serves as a pivot point for the throw. The strength and stability of your back allows you to throw a much heavier opponent than in a move that requires you to lift him. This move uses your opponent's arm as a lever working against him. The greater the torque on his shoulder, the greater the pain inflicted. And exceeding the joint's normal range of motion causes more than just pain. The soft tissue, muscles, and the bone can all be seriously damaged by this pressure.
The goal of this lock is to stretch the tendons at the top of the foot to the breaking point. The strongest tendons have a tensile force threshold of just over 400 pounds. Applying any more pressure than that can tear the tendons from their base or snap them in two.
Because you don't have time to cock your arm in a surprise attack, bursting's effectiveness doesn't come from the rotational power of the torso. Instead, it's driven by the legs, which hurl you forward into your opponent. Both the block and the strike land with 300 pounds of force, more than enough to collapse the windpipe or fracture the delicate bones of the face. Doing the 360 defense requires you keep your body in motion at all times, using your arms to defend different angles of attack. The key is keeping your arms at an oblique angle, with your hands open and straight, so that you don't take any blows straight on. Each is deflected down the angle of your forearm, which reduces its impact.
Your opponent is relying on his grip strength and outstretched arms to maintain the choke. The strength of your back and shoulder muscles is greater than the applied force of your opponent's hold, so it doesn't take much to break his grip.
And the closer your hands are to your own neck, the greater the leverage. The disarm is basically a judo wrist lock and uses many of the same principles. By pulling your attacker forward as you turn, he loses his balance, giving you control of his wrist. The barrel of the gun then becomes a lever, allowing you to take the gun. Because you are using the muscles of your torso, which can deliver up to 10 times more force than the muscles of the wrist, the disarm works against an opponent who is much stronger than you.
Actually, an elbow strike from another martial art, Muay Thai. But because the metal doesn't deform on impact, like human bone, every ounce of power is channeled directly into your opponent's face. With the twisting motion of the torso generating the force, and the stiff metal of the M16 providing the impact, it's enough to shatter a cheekbone or break a jaw. The combined momentum of your forward step, the twist of your torso, and the swing of the rifle, the butt stroke can strike your opponent at over 18 miles per hour, carrying well over 550 pounds of force. That's enough to drive a 16-penny nail through nearly 2 inches of pressure-treated wood. Add a follow-up slash and thrust with a bayonet, and the butt stroke becomes a real killer. But the real damage from the knee bar doesn't come from gravity. It comes from leverage. Once the knee is locked, your hips act like a fulcrum, and his leg acts like a lever, multiplying any force you apply. So even though the ligaments and tendons around the knee can sustain 1,700 newtons of force, the knee bar can load a lot more than that, enough to completely destroy the joint. Pushes his opponent at a location above the center of mass, while using his sweeping leg to create a tripping point, which is below his opponent's center of mass. Once the loss of stability has occurred, gravity does the work, and the damage. On the ground and on his back, your opponent is now vulnerable to any number of finishing strikes. Much like a nutcracker, your forearm and biceps apply pressure to your opponent's carotid arteries. Located on either side of the trachea, these two arteries are the only way to get blood to the brain. It can take less pressure than squeezing an orange to stop the flow of blood to the arteries. And with no blood flow, the brain shuts down almost instantly. Fight over.
Control of your opponent's leg, you turn his hip into a pivot point. And there are two forces being imparted about the pivot point, one by the arm above and one by the sweep below. These forces act as a couple, resulting in your opponent's rotation that slams him right to the deck. And given the speed of rotation and the force of gravity, that impact could cause permanent injury. The key to the double is to hit your opponent below his rib cage, which knocks him off his center of gravity. Wrapping your arms around his legs prevents him from regaining it. Your forward momentum, coupled with the upward thrust of your hips, gets your opponent airborne. Driving him to the mat can yield over 3,000 pounds of injury-producing force. That's like dropping a 20-pound bag of cement off a 9-foot ladder onto someone's chest.
The key to the sprawl is sliding your legs backward, while leaning in and locking your hips at the same time. This forces your opponent's center of mass beyond its stability zone. Coupled with the downward thrust of your forearms, he's now supporting your entire upper body with the back of his neck and head, which leaves him face down on the mat, vulnerable to any number of attacks.
The power of this move comes from the spin. Like the wrecking ball at the end of a demolition crane, the power is generated by the rotation of the body. In conjunction with the snap of the knee, the foot achieves a velocity of nearly 30 miles per hour. When the heel connects with the solar plexus, it transfers 1,400 pounds of force, enough to damage internal organs and fracture multiple ribs. It gets its power from the pressure exerted by your legs. The first leg imparts pressure to the carotid artery. The second leg, working in conjunction with your arms, optimizes that pressure, transforming you into a human vice grip. If your opponent doesn't tap out, he'll pass out. Much longer and permanent brain damage can ensue. Is a combination of two levers. While your legs push up on your opponent's neck, your arms apply downward pressure to his trapped wrist. The opposing forces turn the elbow into an ad hoc fulcrum point. The armbar can result in a complete destruction of the elbow's articulating structures.
The move is difficult but devastating. There's no opposing object to push against, so all the energy of the move must come from the momentum of the leap and the acceleration of the kick. The snapping motion of the lower leg functions much like a coiled spring. When unleashed, the kick reaches impact speeds of 20 miles per hour and delivers up to 400 pounds of force to the opponent's chest. The key to this synergy of speed and power is punch technique, punch location, and punch frequency. With your elbows tucked in behind your fist, the energy of each punch is maximized. And because the punch is delivered to your opponent's core along a center line, the more directly that force is transmitted to his body. The effect is similar to that of continually slamming a battering ram against a door. No matter how strong, it can only sustain so many blows before it collapses. This kick is all about speed. The further the foot travels, the greater its acceleration, and the more dangerous a weapon it becomes. Powered by the muscles of the hip flexor and the quadriceps, by the time your foot reaches your opponent's throat, it's traveling nearly 40 miles per hour. That type of speed yields over 1,000 pounds of force, enough to puncture the Adam's apple and crush your windpipe. The power of the takedown is derived from the simple mechanical advantage you hold over your opponent. By wrapping up his striking leg at the upper thigh, you've placed your opponent in what's called conditional stability. If he remains stationary, he could technically maintain his balance indefinitely. But by driving him backward and initiating a sweep of his other leg, you've added two destabilizing factors, and the loose center of gravity simply cannot hold.
By grabbing the wrist, you provide hundreds of pounds of additional leverage. This reduces your opponent's ground weight by half and allows you to more easily knock your opponent off balance. The rotation of the hips then amplifies the power of the leg sweep. Coupled with the wrist grip, you are in complete control of your opponent's body. Leaning back slightly and driving the knee up utilizes the full power of the thigh, and the foot accelerates up to 16 miles an hour in just 1/4 of a second. That's twice the acceleration speed of a Porsche. Coupled with the rotation of the hips, the kick can impart 450 pounds of force upon impact with the ribs. When executed perfectly, it's a motion similar to cracking a 2x4 with a sledgehammer.